It seems one serving of food is missing. It takes about 4 hours by car from our house to my husband's parents' house. As soon as we arrived, my mother-in-law started making her usual sarcastic comments towards me. My name is Susan. I'm 30 years old. Today, I'm visiting my in-laws with my husband Ken after a long time. These takeout meals are reputed to be delicious, but it seems we are short of Susan's portion. Although she claimed it was a pity, my mother-in-law seemed very pleased. Even though I was convinced it was on purpose, I played along and said, "That's a shame. I was looking forward to trying it." I played along and said, then Ken's younger sister Melissa, who was with us, "Oh, Mom, you're always in such a hurry." And she laughed with delight. I'm sure my sister-in-law is also in on the joke and finding it amusing. She whispering this to my mother-in-law. "This is too funny. Maybe Susan can just get something to eat at a convenience store." I heard their conversation. I smiled amiably and managed to maintain my position as a bride. I met this nasty mother-in-law and sister-in-law 2 years ago. When I visited my husband's family home to announce our marriage, they warmly welcomed me. Susan seems to have a good job, and I'm so glad she's marrying Ken. I've always wanted a lovely sister like Susan. I'm so happy. Let's get along. Both of them smiled broadly and were happy about me becoming part of the family. The father-in-law is a quiet, calm, and kind person. With such wonderful people, my married life would be blissful. I thought that, but after the wedding, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law's attitudes drastically changed. Even if you are good at your job, if you can't do housework, you are a failure as a wife. I refuse to acknowledge such a woman as my son's wife, even though she praised me for working before the marriage. Not to use work as an excuse. My mother-in-law began to say such things. "Susan, since you earn so much from a good job, you could send some money to the house, right?" Melissa, who used to love me like a real sister, started asking for money after the marriage. Far from the loving family I had envisioned, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law had become my sworn enemies. And that brings us to today. "Susan, you can eat my share." As the takeout meals were handed out, my husband Ken said this. "Wait, then Ken won't have anything to eat." A mother-in-law who interrupts the conversation. "I bought a burger. I'll eat that." "But why? It's from a renowned restaurant, Ken." "Yes, brother. It's a waste since we don't get to eat this often." Indeed, on the way here, my husband had bought a local burger that looked delicious. "In that case, I'll have a bit of Susan's." My husband seemed to prefer the heavy taste of the burger to the delicately seasoned treat, so he offered his portion to me. Regrettably for them, their plan to exclude me had failed, and my mother-in-law and sister-in-law gave each other frustrated looks. "Everything tastes really good." When I said this, "Well, of course it does," the mother-in-law coldly replied. The choice of this restaurant, known only to food connoisseurs, is commendable. The meal is quite elegant and suits refined individuals. When I complimented her like this, my mother-in-law seemed a bit pleased. My father-in-law and husband are both indifferent to their surroundings and are unaware of our women's battle. They both are eating as if nothing has happened. Since I wanted to be seen as a kind daughter-in-law by my father-in-law, I never showed any negative emotions outwardly. However, I secretly harbored the desire to retaliate. Then it became evening, and my mother-in-law, as usual, "Susan, won't you make dinner for us?" said this to me. "Susan must be tired from driving. I'll cook." That's what Ken said, but my mother-in-law interrupted. I'm sorry, Ken. I've always dreamed of cooking with my daughter-in-law. And she sent him away. When she put it like that, I couldn't refuse, and agreed to cook dinner. Once we started cooking, my mother-in-law started complaining about every single thing. Hey, what's with the way you cut the vegetables? Didn't your mother teach you? Susan, you're so clumsy. I can do even better than that. My sister-in-law, standing nearby, agreed with my mother-in-law, smirking all the while. Poor Ken. I can't imagine the kind of food he has to eat regularly. It became clear that my mother-in-law had asked me to cook just to criticize me. During the dinner, my father-in-law complimented the food I had made. My mother-in-law was glaring at me with sharp eyes. I could barely assist. Most of the cooking was done by Alice. She's really good at cooking. I should learn from her. I had to flatter my mother-in-law against my will, which was causing a lot of stress for me. After dinner, once I finished cleaning up, the fatigue of the day suddenly hit me, and I started feeling sleepy. And as everyone was relaxing in the living room, I dozed off. Suddenly, Ken, did you know? A nice pub has opened up nearby. Why don't you and your dad go check it out? My mother-in-law said. Yeah, it's a wonderful place. Dad, you went there the other day, didn't you? Oh, that sounds nice. Susan, do you want to go too? I was about to say, let's go, but my mother-in-law cut me off. Susan, you must be tired from driving all the way here. Why don't you rest at home? My husband agreed with my mother-in-law's kind words. That makes sense. And left with my father-in-law to go to the pub. After seeing them off, just when I was about to go to my room to sleep, because I was about to fall asleep, I was called by my mother-in-law. Susan, since we're here, why don't we have some tea together? Sorry, Alice, I'm really tired today, so I'll head to bed. Oh, that's a shame. Well, could you pick some herbs from the garden before you go to bed? Herbs? Sure. Apparently, they were for the tea, and I ended up having to go to the garden alone. I was handed a small flashlight, but it was so dark that I couldn't tell which were the herbs. Somehow, I managed to locate the cultivation plot and picked something that seemed like a herb. Is this okay? I called into the house, but there was no response from my mother-in-law or sister-in-law. As I approached the door to return, I heard the sound of a lock closing. What? The door is locked. Open it, please. Unfortunately, we don't have enough beds for you to sleep on, dear. It's good weather today, so you can use the garden soil as your bed. Sister-in-law, this is too funny. Their laughter echoed. Oh no, I've messed up, I thought. Despite not being my husband and father-in-law there, I wasn't cautious enough. Normally, I would be more careful, but my thinking was dull because I was so sleepy. I was so frustrated that I clenched the herbs tightly. Seeing my situation, they both laughed, holding their stomachs through the glass. Yes, the air here is clear, and you can see the stars beautifully. It's not often you get the chance to see a natural planetarium, Susan. You are such a luxury. Sure, the stars are beautiful, and I could have enjoyed them if it wasn't for this situation. Did you tell me to pick herbs just to get me out? Yes, I can't relax with an outsider like you sleeping in the house. Really? You are not even family. No matter how many times I asked to be let in, their attitudes didn't change. I tried to contact my husband, but I didn't have my phone and I didn't know the location of the bar, so I couldn't do anything. I was so frustrated and angry that I wasn't sleepy anymore. Locking me out at night is going too far with the harassment. The more desperately I tried to open the door, the more they seemed to enjoy laughing. Well, maybe it's not a bad idea to sleep feeling nature once in a while. Fine, I will enjoy feeling the stars, soil, and grass, nature. I gave up resisting and headed for the garage with a broad smile, deliberately saying it. Fortunately, the garage was not locked, and the car keys were left hanging on the wall. I took something out of my car. I carried them to the garden and started assembling them, and my mother-in-law looked flustered. What are you doing? She said with surprise. What? I'm setting up a tent. Actually, camping is my hobby, and I'm glad I left my gear in the trunk. A tent? You'll ruin the garden. Didn't you say I could do as I please? Ignoring my mother-in-law's objections, I began to drive stakes into the ground. They continued to prattle on, but I ignored them, pretending not to hear. In addition to the tent, I had a portable stove and some food which I decided to use. I quickly boiled water in a kettle and made a coffee. I also lit a lantern, completing my setup. By the way, you did invite me for tea earlier. How about we have it here? I called out to the two of them, who were busy complaining and glaring. Then my mother-in-law suddenly fell silent and closed the curtains as if shutting me out. I couldn't help but smile, feeling a total victory over the two of them who must have been frustrated. About an hour passed as I enjoyed my coffee and read my book. Then something started to fall from the sky. I picked it up to examine it, and it turned out to be hail. I figured the altitude here was high and the weather was unstable. But I thought a little hail wouldn't be a problem. But contrary to my thoughts, the weather worsened and large hailstones began to fall. I quickly took refuge in the tent, only for the large hailstone to turn into rain. Perhaps because I had hurriedly set up the tent, rain was seeping in front of the floor. The temperature dropped significantly, and I began to shiver from the cold. I approached the house again to ask for help. Alice, the rain is terrible. Please let me inside the house. Then my mother-in-law and sister-in-law appeared, pulling back the curtains. The temperature has dropped with the rain, and I feel like I'm going to freeze. Oh, is that so? Why don't you make some coffee to warm up? Doesn't this feel like the essence of camping? Enjoy it! The two of them closed the curtains with smiles on their faces. The fire in the lantern went out, and the surroundings were engulfed in darkness. I had no choice but to take refuge in the car. Wanting something like a blanket to warm up, I searched inside the in-laws' car. I found a blanket, and when I picked it up, I noticed a point card from a pub. It might be from the place where Ken and the others went to drink. I decided to head to the pub with the card in hand. Upon finding and entering the pub, I discovered my father-in-law and Ken, as well as other relatives were there. Seeing me soaked to the bone, everyone made a surprised face. Relative man said, "You all right? Here, drink this to warm up." He offered me a glass of vodka. As the alcohol permeated my body and the good feeling of inebriation set in. Actually, I've been looked out of the house by them, I confessed. They seemed displeased with me sleeping in the house. They told me to sleep in the yard. I intended to stay silent, but the alcohol gave me the courage to spill everything in front of my relatives. Yes, not only today's event, but everything that had occurred since the wedding. Upon hearing this, "Oh, so it's true." Relatives all said the same thing. It seemed my mother-in-law was not well liked among the relatives. During the discussion when my husband's grandfather needed caregiving, "I will not care for a stranger. My mother-in-law resolutely refused staying. Starting from such a story, before we knew it, the relatives and I had a great time reading about my mother-in-law. We drank until dawn, and Ken and I ended up staying at a relative's house, returning to my in-laws' house around noon the next day. Then, as soon as I saw my mother-in-law, "Susan, I'm sorry. It seems I was a bit harsh yesterday. I got carried away seeing you after a long time. I'm sorry." They both called at me, trying to pretend yesterday's events never happened. Apparently, my father-in-law, who had returned home alone late at night, had given them a stern scolding. "But well, Susan, you seemed to enjoy camping, so it was good, wasn't it?" At my mother-in-law's words, I could no longer contain my anger. "What was good about it? It's not like I enjoyed being put through that. It was awful. Please stop this." "No need to get so angry. I'm apologizing, aren't I?" As if she had the right to say that. No matter how much she apologized, I couldn't forgive her. I could no longer bear it and opened my mouth. "I can't do this anymore." Upon saying this, my mother-in-law made a puzzled face. "What do you mean? You can't?" "I can't face you or Melissa anymore. I don't even want to see your faces." "What? That's a problem." My sister-in-law interjected into the conversation. It seemed that my father-in-law had warned the two of them that if they didn't change their attitudes towards me, they'd be kicked out of the house. This was something I heard last night, but it seemed that my father-in-law was considering divorcing my mother-in-law over the caregiving incident. And this discussion seems to have resurfaced due to their attitudes towards me this time. I imagine even my father-in-law is tired of living with such nasty women. My mother-in-law came to me, begging on her knees to change my father-in-law's mind. However, I had no intention of forgiving my mother-in-law. Why should I? No, thank you. With that firm denial, I left the in-laws' house with Ken. Even after that, the two of them persistently kept contacting us, but my mind did not change and I continued to ignore them. As a result, it seemed that my mother-in-law, along with Melissa, was abandoned by my father-in-law and kicked out of the house. According to what I heard from a relative, they seemed to be living poorly in a small old apartment. Unable to survive solely on their pension and with Jane being a spendthrift with debts, the two of them seemed to be working from morning till night. And these two, who had hardly ever worked before, seemed to age rapidly due to the daily scolding at their workplaces. On the other hand, my husband and I started visiting my father-in-law more often. The parties with my kind father-in-law and the relatives who love alcohol are always lively and irresistibly fun. Nowadays, I have completely forgotten about those two and I'm living very happy days.